I was a little bit worried. I thought after last night and all the music and everything, no one was going to show up. So I'm glad that you took some time this morning. Hopefully got some good coffee. This is my 18th coffee from Stock Felts. I don't know how to pronounce that. Could someone? Stock Felts? Stock Felts? It's delicious. And Tim's is delicious, too. That's my journey tomorrow. It's my classic Oslo tradition is to go over to Tim's. Anyways, awesome. So I built a lot of applications over the last 6 years of being a mobile developer. And while I've always focused on creating connected experiences, whether it's connecting devices to devices or devices to IoT devices, and created this mesh network of how all my data is everywhere all at once, what I keep finding is that the basics of creating a disconnected application is the most important to our users. So what I'm going to do today is show you how you can leverage multiple services, some from Microsoft, some not from Microsoft, and some different use cases to create not only these connected applications, but really focus on those disconnected scenarios that are so important for our mobile applications. So I'm going to talk about some easy things, some scaffolding things, and some really awesome real-time things. So I broke down the agenda like this over the next hour. I'm going to talk about the need for offline sync. I talk to a lot of developers all over the world all the time, and all the different use cases, whether it's commercial, consumer, agriculture. There's all sorts of different use cases and the need for offline synchronization for our mobile apps. I'm going to talk about building a backend for your application or leveraging an existing backend that you have today, or maybe you're integrating into third-party services. We're going to take a look at building an application with full offline synchronization across all mobile platforms, so iOS, Android, and Windows. And then what we're going to do is switch. And we're going to take a look at something a little bit different, which is real-time connected and disconnected databases, which is my new favorite passion. And we're going to do that by looking at Realm. Has anyone ever heard of Realm before? A few of you. If you haven't, it's going to blow your mind. It's phenomenal. I love it. Because for the use cases of real-time databases where you want instant responses, it's mind-blowing. And of course, I'll give you all the places to get started, all the samples, all that jazz. So I'm James Montemagno. I'm a principal program manager at Microsoft. Previous to joining Microsoft via acquisition, via I had to come along via acquisition. I worked at Xamarin for about 3.5 years as a developer evangelist. I was here at NDC Oslo 2 years ago, actually, talking a lot about Xamarin and drinking delicious coffee. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of coming to Oslo and NDC is they just keep filling me up with delicious coffee, which is great. It just reminds me of home in Seattle. Same weather, delicious coffee. It's great. So I'm super excited. And that's where I live. I live in Seattle. I lived there pre-Microsoft acquisition. I was the only Xamarin employee in Seattle, which was really cool. And I actually moved out to Seattle to become a mobile developer. I was working at Canon, actually OSE, which is a company from the Netherlands, and writing printer software. And while printer software is great, because everyone needs a printer, I thought mobile applications were going to take off, and they did, which was good. So I've been up there for about 6 years, and I moved there, of course, for a job, but also to drink all of our delicious coffee, and, of course, to build mobile applications. So that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. And you guys can find me at all places all over the internet. But if you want to hear more from me after the conference, I have a podcast called Merge Conflict, which is a super awesome name for a podcast. It took us 2 years to come up with that name, and then we could start the podcast. That I do in my off time with my good friend Frank. And then I have a show on Channel 9. So the Channel 9 booth's out there. You may see me hosting. I actually have a weekly development show focused on Xamarin, because that's my major platform that I develop in. It's called The Xamarin Show. I was real original with the title. Thought of that one myself. And you can go to xamarinshow.com. And then you can always contact me anytime by just emailing me, motts@Microsoft or @JamesMontemagno. Just Google me. You'll find me. I'm out there. There's only one James Montemagno in the world. So there's two, me and my dad. But he's into iron work, and I'm a developer. So just James Montemagno developer. Good. So while I'm a Xamarin developer, I'm going to actually do all my demos today in Xamarin, so it'll all be in C#. But every single technology that I'm going to demo will work across any way that you're building mobile applications, whether it's with Xamarin in C# or F#, using Objective-C, Swift, Java, React Native, Cordova. All the technologies I talk about work today in all of them, or just about all of them, and I'll kind of go through those. So let's talk about these mobile applications. Over the last 6 years, I've shipped about 70+ iOS, Android, and Windows applications across all the different app stores. Not only just working at a small startup, working at Xamarin, and then in my spare time, I still like to develop apps when I'm not talking about building apps. And really, it's true that kind of great app experiences make our app great. I mean, it's why our users come back over and over again. So whether we're creating rich media experiences or deep integration into the OS and integrating the latest SiriKit or Cortana integrations or something like that, it really makes our app stand out. Creating great native experiences with really fast user interface and designing for the platform is super crucial. And of course, security and identity is really what our users are expecting, whether they're logging in with Twitter, with Azure AD, or with some other auth provider. It's important that they feel comfortable during that experience. Well, the one thing that I'm going to focus on, which I found time and time again, that creates a great app experience is giving our users their data all the time, no matter what. So whenever they need it, they should have access to it. So when I go and talk and I build applications, there's this kind of myth that, well, we have amazing smartphones, and they're always connected to the internet, no matter where we're at in the world, so why should I care about disconnected mobile applications? Well, if you take a look at the United States, for instance, we have pretty good coverage. I live in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest up there, which is okay. But there seems to be something in the United States that's kind of missing, and that's kind of all up here. And that's all farm territory, really. And as soon as you kind of get off one of the major highways, your phone is in a dead zone. And if you happen to be a farmer out there that's working in agriculture, it's actually one of the hottest trending mobile divisions, I swear. Agriculture, everyone loves it. And farming is that these farmers are going out in the morning, taking their tablets, which have all of their weather conditions, crop conditions, watering conditions, taking it off the dock, bringing it out onto their tractors, onto all of their equipment, entering all of their data, and there's no Wi-Fi, no internet, there's nothing in the middle of the fields. And this is true whether it's in the United States, whether it's in South America, whether it's in Europe, anywhere. It just is true that we can't get internet absolutely everywhere. So, well, that's the United States. Let's try to take a look at other emerging markets that are out there, such as Africa and even parts of Asia. So here what's interesting is I've selected 2G, 3G, and 4G, and we can see that the coverage is extremely spotty, especially in emerging markets such as South Africa or in anywhere else in Africa, actually. If you're not in a major city, it's extremely hard to get internet. I experienced this for the first time. I heard a story from our CEO, Nat Freeman, a long time ago that said when he was traveling in Africa, on holiday, that he saw something that blew his mind, which is that there was this kid that had a cell phone that would travel nearly an entire day into a city to connect to the internet, download and sync everything, and then leave for an entire week. And that was their experience of using mobile applications and the internet as a whole, which is why you can see why Facebook and Google and everyone wants to send these little cloud bubbles and spread internet everywhere. And I experienced this for my first time when I went down to Cuba. As an American, we couldn't go for a long time, so now we can. Maybe in a few months we won't be able to again, but I was there, and I witnessed something very interesting, which is that there's no internet anywhere. And when I got off the plane, my Google Fi, which I swore had internet everywhere, because Google, I swear, has internet everywhere. And I get there, and it's like, welcome to Cuba. We don't have any service here. And I go, oh, that's no good. And then I realized that it's really hard to get Wi-Fi in Cuba because there's only Wi-Fi in very certain hotels and certain public parks. And you see these huge gatherings of people in these areas, and they only have so many IP addresses that they give away. So of the $10 or $15 that I've spent for an hour of internet in a whole week, that was my experience. So I started to live this experience of, oh, I don't have internet, I don't have access, how am I gonna check in for my flight? Now this is interesting here because this is where I selected 2G, 3G, and 4G. And I don't know about you, but whenever I see HSPA plus or 3G, I just chuck my phone out the window because what is it really good for at that point? Because it's no good. And that's what I did here. And this is the current 4G and LTE coverage in those same exact areas. So it's not only creating great app experiences for the disconnected experience, but it's also for the spotty connection and when it goes online and offline. So in my studies, I've kind of taken a look at a lot of my applications that I use. So we have a busing application in Seattle called One Bus Away. I'm a big football fan, soccer, if you will. I still call it football. And I use Southwest a lot for a lot of my travel in the States. And I kind of put my phone into airplane mode, and I said, well, let's see how this works. And sure enough, I didn't expect the bus routes to work at all. But immediately, my Southwest just closed right away, and same with my Sounders. I couldn't check my score. I couldn't see anything. It was really intriguing to me because Southwest knew I was logged in. Yesterday, it knew my flights. Heck, 5 minutes ago, it knew my flights when I had internet, but now it doesn't. So I took a look at some other applications that I use a lot, and one that I created myself. The one on the left here is Robinhood, which is a stock application where I pretend that I know anything about the stock market. And that's my real stocks, as you can see, on there. And as soon as I booted it up, it told me I was offline, but it showed me all of my cache data. It showed me all of the data with a timestamp of when that last transaction was. And of course, I'm offline. I'm not expecting real-time data, but I am expecting it to show me where it was and the last time I checked it or last time it refreshed in the background. On the right-hand side is our Xamarin Evolve conference application that I developed for our Xamarin Evolve conference. And what was unique here is that we have people coming from all over the world that may have internet, may have conference internet. Not all conference internet is created equal. And I wanted to make sure that they could go in, browse all their sessions, favorite things, and as soon as they got back online, it was synced immediately. And that's a great app experience. So what about the backends that we're going to integrate into? Well, there's two really scenarios. There's ones where we control the backend or we're integrating with a third-party backend. So if we're creating our own backend, there's great services out there from Microsoft with Azure mobile apps, which we'll be looking at today. Amazon has AWS and it has mobile integrations. Couchbase, Oracle, IBM also have solutions, and Realm, where we'll look at for real-time databases. But also, if you're integrating with a third-party application or backend service, that's what often I do, you may want to just think about caching things locally into a local SQLite database. There's a lot of service providers out there because every phone has SQLite on it. So SQL Cipher is a 256-bit encrypted database. SQLite Net, for instance, is a .NET wrapper over SQLite. There's a lot of these out there. So let me show you what that looks like in one of my apps. And this was one of my most requested features. So this is my real phone. And what I'm going to do here is I have it mirrored right here. So I run a local user group in Seattle. It's called the Seattle Mobile.NET User Group. And about 5 years ago, I created this app that'll allow me to go in and there it is, SeattleMobile.net. It would go out, it would find all of my upcoming events, and I could go in and I could check in my users. Now, for a long time, it was just online only. If you didn't have internet access, you didn't have anything, you couldn't check in anybody at all. You could, as soon as you left this screen, you couldn't come back. But here I'm going to check some people in here. But what I found is that my most requested feature was actually from a use case that I didn't think of, was that there was a lot of hiking groups and running groups that were all over the place and wanted to have this data everywhere because they were hiking mountains. And they wanted to make sure that if they left with 20 people, they came back with 20 people, and those were the same 20 people they left with. So I added a little feature just recently. It says save offline. So there I am. I'm offline. So now what I can do is close out all my other apps. It's my real phone. There we go. And I'm going to close out of here. And I'm just going to go into airplane mode. And we're going to go into Meetup Manager. There we go. Now what I did here is I wanted to make it so portions of my app could be used offline. So I say, hey, you're offline. I detect that you're offline. And what I do is I immediately navigate you into all your offline cache data. And what I've done here is I just stored everything in a local SQLite database. So I'm using the SQLite Net, which is works cross-platform for .NET applications. And it's super crazy simple. You just have little primary keys, indexes, any of that stuff, and you can simply create tables, insert things, do link queries if you want to, and that's it. So now what's cool is that if I come into my Lightning Talks, it'll load everything just as if I was online. It caches the images. I can continue to check people in. Now what's cool is if I come back online, I'll give it a second here, go back over here. We can actually see to make sure that we have 10 people there because I checked in a few more people. I come back into my groups. Now that I'm back online, I can come into my Seattle, where is it at? SeattleMobile.net. And go into my Lightning Talks. And sure enough, it's synchronized and it's using the same data. So no matter if I'm checking in people in my online data or now come back and I should have 14 in my offline events, sure enough, they're all there. So this really created a great experience by literally doing nothing but storing just a few tokens into a little database. It took me just a few days to implement. And by implementing this one feature, I have one little thing, which is this ad that you probably, there's like an ad on the bottom here that costs $2.99 to remove. And just by adding that one feature on iOS and Android, my sales of removing ad banners, because I said, hey, I have this new feature, think about supporting development and removing ads, have gone up 1,500% by adding one feature that took me one day. It's crazy. Now, I was integrating into the Meetup API. Now, you may not be able to do that. You may be having your own ASP.NET backend or your own backends, or maybe you're spinning up a backend for the first time, and you want to create an online and offline connected experience. Now, I'm obviously work at Microsoft, so I'm going to talk about infrastructure at scale of what we have in Azure. Is anyone using Azure today, on-prem or off-prem? Beautiful, I love that. What's really cool about Azure is that I was an Azure customer before even being acquired by Microsoft at Xamarin, and even before I joined Xamarin. I was a Microsoft developer. If Microsoft told me to do something, I just did it. It sounded great. I mean, I wrote WinForms app, I wrote WPF apps, I wrote Silverlight apps, I wrote Windows Phone apps, I rewrote my apps 5 more times, and then boom, I was good. Whenever Microsoft told me to rewrite my app, I did it. And then I wrote them for iOS and Android, and I only have to write them once. But what's cool is that we have actually more data centers around the globe than AWS and Google Cloud combined. What's really unique, though, is that we give you this amazing service called Azure Stack. Has anyone heard of Azure Stack? All right, so a few of you haven't. Imagine that while we have 40 compute regions, and we have hundreds of thousands of data centers around the globe to create a mesh network, if you're in an organization that can't deploy to the cloud, you can bring Azure to you. Azure Stacks allows you to actually run almost all of Azure in your own data centers on hardware approved by Microsoft. So you say, hey, Microsoft, I'd like my own Azure, and they say, cool, that sounds great. Now, you're not going to get the updates quite as fast as then we deploy it, but you can automatically do that. Think of it like TFS, where there's Visual Studio Team Services and Team Foundation Service, or runs in the cloud and one's on-prem with the same exact features. You can actually bring Azure to you. What's really cool is Scott Guthrie, he has this video, which he hasn't given to me, one day he will, of how this cruise line actually runs an Azure data center on the cruise ship. So they have all of their data all the time when they're out at sea, which is pretty spectacular. Now, Azure has a bajillion things in it. Look at all those bubbles. There's so many things. App service is what we'll focus on today, which is our web, mobile, API, and logic applications. That's where any of your ASP.NET websites would live today, or where your mobile integrations and databases will be. We also have some other things, such as Service Fabric for microservices, Azure Functions, which is our serverless compute, which is one of my favorite services. We have a bunch of PaaS and IaaS services, a bunch of 4-letter acronyms that I have no idea what it means, but they're there. Cool. So what we're going to focus on is that Azure Mobile Apps, which lives inside of App Service. And why I like Azure Mobile Apps is that it's extremely powerful because it's leveraging all of Azure. Azure Mobile Apps is a server and mobile integration, so server and client. And they connect up together no matter how you're building your apps. They're super flexible. You can leverage it on top of an existing Node.js backend, or you can spin up a new Node.js backend inside of Azure. Or you can use App Service itself and create a full ASP.NET backend, or leverage your own ASP.NET backend and add on top of it. What's cool is that there's a full cross-platform SDK for iOS, Android, and Windows. There's also SDKs for Cordova, for Objective-C, for Java, to do full online-offline data synchronization. And it's all open source. Not only the C# SDKs that I'll be demoing today, but the other SDKs too are all open source on GitHub. So you can raise issues, you can read documentation, which is really great. So how this works is normally if I was going to start integrating with a backend like I did with meetup.com, is they have a REST service point, I do my auth tokens, I make JSON request calls via their API, I pull down the data, I deserialize it, I got to figure out all the different mappings and throw it through JSON.NET, and then do posts, and I have to handle all of the actual business logic myself. So what Azure Mobile Apps says is, hey, listen, there's probably going to be a REST API in between. What we're going to do is abstract that for you into a really easy SDK for your iOS, Android, and Windows applications. And we'll make you kind of just do normal CRUD operations, so insert, adds, deletes, but we'll abstract and hide that RESTful service call. We'll do it for you, and I'll show you what that means when we get into code. What's cool, though, is that through that REST API that is abstracted for you into a simple cross-platform SDK, is you can automatically connect to user authentication, push notifications, and any data connection that you want. The easiest out of the box is just SQL Azure that you can spin up. Additionally, what you can do is if you have a SQL instance on-prem, is you can actually use Azure hybrid connections and synchronize your SQL up to the cloud. So there's a lot of options there. You don't have to only use the SQL Azure. But what this does is through that RESTful API and the SDKs, it does that full online-offline data synchronization, and your backend code can live anywhere, whether it's running in Azure, Azure Stack, on VSTS, Bitbucket, GitHub. You can put it wherever you want. So cool. Let's build a backend and build an application. I'm going to jump out here. All right. So we don't need this anymore. Boom. All right, cool. We don't need this anymore. And we have this. Now, what we're going to build today is an application that I started building for myself a little bit ago, and it's called Coffee Cups. And the idea of this application is that I needed to somehow track my coffee consumption, because I drink a lot of coffee, and I wanted to do some cost-saving analysis of how often I'm drinking coffee away from the house or drinking coffee at home, and how much money I would save if I transition those over. But of course, I drink coffee all the time, all parts of the day, and who knows where I'll be at. Maybe I'm on my Surface Book, maybe I'm on my Mac, maybe on my Android phone. So I wanted to be cross-platform, and I wanted to have it everywhere. And I wanted to also at some point distribute this so people could use it themselves, so you could log into your own account and see how much coffee you're consuming. So this application is written with Xamarin and Xamarin Forms, and it's quite simple. I have a simple model, which is a cup of coffee. And what I do here is I have an ID, I have a date, if it's made at home, the operating system that it was on, and the location that was here. Additionally, I have this little Azure version that I'll talk about in a little bit that will give me a way of doing conflict resolution. Now, this application is quite simple. What it's going to do is have a single page, the XAML page. What it's going to do is going to open it up. And I'll go ahead and pump up the fonts a little bit. There we go. So it's quite simple. What it's going to have here is it's going to have a little label. It's going to ask me if I made it at home. I have a switch to toggle if I made it at home, a button to add coffee, which is going to hit this add coffee command. And then I have a little entry field here so I could type in the location wherever I was at and was drinking coffee. And then what I do is I just have a simple list view. And this is all across platform XAML with Xamarin Forms. And I have a talk later today on that and creating really rich experiences with Xamarin Forms. But it doesn't really matter what the UI is built with, just so you get the concepts of how I'm building it here, is I group the coffees by date. So was it yesterday, today, or whatever? So these events all go through my view model. So I'm a big MVVM type developer. So what I have in here is a grouping of coffees. I have this thing called an Azure service, and I have a few bindable properties like a loading message, a Boolean for if I'm at home, a location. I'm using my new favorite C#7 feature. I don't know, I love little Lambda arrows everywhere. And then I have two methods called load coffee. It's really simple. It's just really simple code. I go off to my Azure service. I say, give me all my coffees asynchronously. And I simply update my list of coffees. And then I sort them. So down here, when I look at my sort and I peek to definition there, I can see that I'm using this nice little link query to group everything by the date and the display date and getting a little grouping here. And then whenever I add a coffee, it's very simple code too. I call into this Azure service, which is what we're going to write together. And I have add coffee. So that's my application. And what we need to do is connect it up to Azure, because right now there's nothing in the Azure service. If I go into this Azure service here, well, actually I did fill it all in. That's good. I thought I deleted it. That's okay. So we'll go and we'll go do some stuff and create it together. We'll do this. Ready? Delete, delete. Oh, I was up really late last night. No one look. There we go. Shh. All right, cool. That's good. We'll delete all this stuff. We're doing it live. Final prep. All right, cool. The rest is fine. Cool. So what we need to do is we need to hook this backend up, but we need to deploy a backend. So what I'm going to do here is that's my mobile app, and I'm getting ready to develop, and I could maybe create some mock service that I'm talking to, but we want to do it live. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in and hit New, and under Web and Mobile in the Azure portal, we're going to see a few different things. We have web apps like ASP.NET. We have logic apps and mobile apps. And mobile apps is very confusing because it's not actually a mobile app. It's a mobile app backend. So those are all of our backend services. So I could say coffee is great in Oslo, and that's available. And we'll create a new group, and I could create a service plan here. Lets me put in an existing group so I can delete it later. I have an Oslo coffee group. And here I will put it in my Oslo coffee plan. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to provision an app service with this URL, coffee is great in Oslo.azurewebsites.net. I'm going to say pin to dashboard. I'm going to hit create. So what this will do is in just a few seconds, it'll scaffold out my backend and my app service logic, which is really cool. So this just takes a few seconds here. They have a little progress bar. There it is, cool. So it totally happens super fast, which is great. But it hasn't really done anything besides made sure that it's in a resource group. I could take a look at data in, data out, very fancy charts. This is all very nice. And there is a URL here. So if I tap on that URL, it's going to say, hey, your app service is ready, but you haven't deployed anything yet. And that's OK. So what we can do now at this point is that we have our app service. We can deploy our backend code and download our backend code if we would like to. But we need to let this app service communicate to our database. So what I'm going to do here is scroll down in all these crazy settings. So there's scale up, scale out, all the stuff if you would create an ASP.NET website, because it is an ASP.NET website. But over here we have easy tables, easy APIs, and data connections. And data connections are a way to say, hey, listen, this is OK to talk to this database. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, let's configure a SQL database. I could also configure a storage account if I wanted to. Here I have a demo database. I have a connection, because I already set up a SQL server earlier, because that takes about 5 to 10 minutes. So I'm just going to type in my username and password. There we go. Hit OK. And what this is going to do is it's just going to say, hey, this app service, it's cool to go talk to this database. We're best friends. It's great. So cool. And this takes anywhere from immediate to 15 seconds. I like how it does say, oh, boom, done. Cool. So now at this point, I'm almost ready to go, except for I need to actually get an ASP.NET application to deploy. So under deployments here, I can go into Quick Start. And when I do that, it's going to give me a list of all the different ways that you could build an application that's supported. So Objective-C, Swift, Android, Xamarin Forms, iOS, Android, and Cordova. So here, this will just make sure that you have a database. And here I'm going to say my backend is going to be C#. So let me go ahead and actually download that backend code. And that I'm just going to put on my desktop. I already did this yesterday, so we'll have it all set up. Now, if you want to, it'll also give you some sample code. It'll give you a full sample application to run with a little to-do item application. So I've downloaded this backend, and I've configured it a little bit ahead of time. So this is the backend code that's given to you, but I've added a few things into it. So let me go ahead and show you what this looks like. It's just an ASP.NET application. So we have data objects, we have models, we have controllers, we have some app start. It should look very familiar if you've done any ASP.NET development before. When I right-click and say Manage NuGet Packages, we can see I have AutoMapper, Entity Framework, all the ASP.NET stuff. And we have these Azure Mobile Server NuGets that were automatically added for me, which is what's going to allow it to talk to our mobile applications and create mobile-optimized controllers and tables. So what I did over here is I created a cup of coffee over here, and it has almost all of the data properties from our mobile application. The difference here is that the server is implementing inheriting from entity data. So entity data already has, let me go and bump this up a little bit too, already has an ID, a version, created at, deleted, all that jazz, which is cool. Now, what I can do once I have that model in there is I can create a controller. So this isn't your typical ASP.NET controller. It's a mobile-optimized table controller. Because often your database may have like all sorts of columns and all this data, and you don't want to synchronize that down to your application. What you want to do is just do a subset of your data. So this is an optimized table of cup of coffee, and all it does down here is it has a get all cups of coffee, get cup of coffee, patch cup of coffee, post cup of coffee, delete cup of coffee. It has all the cup of coffees that are there. And at this point, you can even add simple integration. So if you add OAuth, for instance, you can get the claims principal, the provider, the ID of the user. So I added some sample code in here so you can see how that works there. So if you had logged in with Twitter, you can add authorized flags and a bunch of stuff. So now what you can do is you can go in, and our mobile application is basically ready to go. Like every good developer, you go in, don't put in any CI or CD, you just hit publish because there's a button there, and why wouldn't you hit the publish button? And what you can do is you can come in and create a new profile, and you can select an existing or create a new one. And here I could come in. I'm logged in with the same account. So under my Oslo group, what we're going to see here is that I have that coffee is great in Oslo. I also have an Oslo coffee that I created last night, and I've already deployed it. So it's the same exact one. I just not going to deploy it just in case. So what I can do here is take a look at this Oslo coffee. I did the exact same thing. I promise, no trickery. I literally just did the same thing, and you can see when I did it, I guess. There's some statistics in here. So I've deployed it, and once I've deployed it, I just have this little tiny front end that says my mobile application is running, and it's good to go. It's good to go. It's connected to my database, and what I can actually do over here, since I've deployed it and there's a real database, is I can actually use the SQL Object Explorer here. I'm connected to Azure, so I'm connected to my database in the cloud, which always blows my mind. I have all my tables that are in here. Here's my cup of coffee. And what I'm going to do is just say view data. And this is going to make a real live connection out to Azure into that table. It should freeze Visual, there it is. It should freeze Visual Studio, and that's how you know it's working. On our 100 megabit connection here. That's what happens when you run it right on the UI thread. Good work, SQL team. And what this is doing is, for the first time at least, making the connection. I've added my IP in. We should see a spinner. I swear this works. It's faster if you're doing it on-prem, obviously, but it's happening all in Azure. There we go, perfect. So what we have here is we have the blank database that we created. Yes, it took that time to display that I have nothing in my database. It was great. So let's put something in the database. And what I want to show is that I've created a RESTful API. And my mobile apps have a great SDK that I can integrate into, but I can use that RESTful API from anywhere. So what I can do is I can open up Postman, which is my favorite desktop app to do HTTP gets and posts and all that stuff. And what I can do is I can come in and I can query it here. So there's oslocoffee.azurewebsites.net/tables/cup of coffee. And all I have to do is add this little token on the end of Zumo API version 2.0. It's like a little bit of extra security so no one can just like get it, I guess. And if I hit send here, this is going to go off, make my RESTful service call, and return nothing because there's nothing in it. That makes sense. But I can also come in and say post. So it's the same URL. The difference here is I'm going to execute with post, and I'm going to put something in the body. So yesterday, I walked a little bit over to Fuglin. Is that how you say it? I hope so. It was also delicious. So this is really what happened. That's my location. I'm going to send it some JSON and hit send. And when I do that, I get the actual response back that this is when I added it. It came from Postman, and here's all my data that's there. If I come back into my gets and hit send, there we go. There's my data that just came in, and I'm talking to that backend. In fact, you know that I'm talking to that backend because when I come over here and hit refresh and let Visual Studio freeze again, and it refreshes that SQL connection, what we're going to see up top, it's usually faster the second time. Sometimes. Do it, do it. Woo. That's why I only do it 1 or 2 times during the whole demo, because everyone likes looking at, there it is. Oh, there it is, good. Okay, cool. So that's my database, and what's cool here is that this is a real connection, so if you want to, I can say Postman NDC, so I can just update the operating system and make that request, because that's exactly how everyone updates their database. And if I come back over to my get and I hit post, what do you know? It literally is updated there, right? So we can already see that those APIs are live and things are good. So let's integrate it into our mobile application now that we have those RESTful services up. So inside of my Azure service, I have a mobile service sync table, and I have a mobile service client. And what I want to do is set up this Oslo coffee. So what I'm going to do is say, I have this initialize method that I just call all the time to make sure that nothing was garbage collected or I didn't disconnect. I want to make sure it's always live. So what I'm going to say is client.syncContext.is initialized. If any of that is null, I'm just going to return. I'll pump up these fonts one more time for everybody. That's good enough, I hope, for everyone. So now what I can do, I say, if I've initialized it once, it's good. Just go ahead and you're out of there. If something is null, you just can continue on. Then I'm going to say client equals new mobile service client. I'm going to pass it in the URL. There we go. And what's cool here is that this also takes in HTTP message handlers. So you can intercept every single call that's actually being passed in. So those posts and your puts and everything like that, you can intercept all of those with your own HTTP message handlers. So once I've done that, I'm going to create a new SQLite store. So by default, everything inside of here is stored in a SQLite database. And you're probably wondering, James, how did you get all these namespaces? Well, I have a NuGet installed. So here's my NuGets. And just like I've installed the Azure mobile server clients, I've installed the Azure mobile client SDKs. This is the online one, and this is the default offline synchronization, which is the SQLite store. So what I can do here is I can say var store db equals coffee.db, and then I can say var store equals new SQLite store. And what I can do is pass it in a store db, a file name. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a private database on iOS, Android, or Windows that it can do all the table entry for me. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to say store.define table. And it's all generic size, so I can just say cup of coffee. There we go. So I've defined it. It's going to do automatic schema changes. So if I update any of my schema, it'll automatically update for me. Now what I'm doing here is I have my local store that's on disk, but it doesn't know how to synchronize with the backend. So what I need to do is I need to initialize this synchronization context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say client dot sync context dot initialize async and pass it in the store. So what this does, it makes the connection to say, I know about Azure because this is my client and it has the sync context. Here's my local data store for the mobile application, and you can figure out how to sync. So now what I can do is I can get my coffee table, and I can say client.get sync table and say give it for my cup of coffee there. Now once I have this coffee table, I can do all sorts of stuff. So I can say coffee table dot, and I can create a query. I can delete async. I can insert async. I can look up. I can do link queries. I can pull. I can purge. And this is all local that's there. Look at the table name. I can do all sorts of link stuff that's coming in. So here's what I can do is I can start initializing and doing synchronization. So adding synchronization is as easy as just a few lines of code. So what I can do is, first thing I'm going to do is check connectivity. So I'll say I have a connectivity plugin installed that'll check if I'm online or offline. So I'm going to say if I'm not connected to the internet, is connected. Let me just return. Because there's no need to synchronize if I'm offline. Just return the local data. And then what I'll do is I will await. I'm going to coffee table pull async. I'm going to pull down all the data that I need, and it'll figure out everything for me. What's unique here is I can pass in specific query IDs and link queries to my actual backend, so it can do incremental synchronization. So it's kind of a token. So I'll just say all coffee. And then my coffee table, I can do a create query. And you could create a whole bunch of different link queries and pass it to your backend, so it's very optimized. So if you're like, oh, only give me the coffee of this user or from this location, and then you can pass that up to the server. And then what I'll do is I'll just push all my data locally. So I'll say await, and I'll say client.syncContext.push async there. So literally, just a few lines of code to check connectivity, pull down the data, push the data asynchronously. Now the other methods I've already filled in ahead of time. So here I have that get coffee, so whenever I pull it down, I initialize, I sync my coffees, and then what I do is I simply say, now, if I'm online or offline, it doesn't matter. Give me my local data and order it by the date UTC for me and enumerate all asynchronously. When I add a cup of coffee, I'm passing in if I'm at home or not and the location. And what I do here is I say cup of coffee, fill in the UTC time, pass that Boolean, set the location if I'm at home or the location. I'm using Xamarin Forms, so it actually has this OS flag for iOS, Android, or Windows. So I'm just using that. And then I just have a few methods. What I'm doing here is I'm creating that coffee. I'm inserting it locally. I'm not doing any internet connections at all. I'm inserting it locally into the database. And then I will say sync coffee. Now, this is a demo, so you probably aren't going to try to synchronize with your backend every single time your user does stuff. You're probably going to have some background service that does sync, or you selectively have a sync button or something like that. But for demo purposes, I'm going to sync whenever I get or insert something. And then I'm going to return that coffee back. And that's all my backend code. That's it. So now what I can do is I can come in, and I can go ahead and select my emulator here for Android, and I'm just going to hit debugging. And with all my code spun up, we should see our coffee cup application spin up and start talking to our Android application right here. And the only thing that I've done, by the way, in the actual platform-specific code, because everything else was shared, is I just added one line of code into my main activity to initialize it, so that way it doesn't get linked and removed away at all. So essentially there, I do that on iOS and Android because we have advanced linker in Xamarin, so I don't want to remove any of that code. So give it a second here while it spins up and starts building the application. We'll see what it's doing. There we go. It'll deploy to my phone. You can do it. Zip aligning. There we go. It's totally happening. Love it. All right. In my sweet debug mode, I have a beautiful spinner that you can see there of loading my coffees. So it's created my database. I have a little entry that I can put in here if I want to. There's my Postman NDC. I can come in and say, well, this morning from stock. There we go. I can say add coffee. So there we go. It's added in there. If I come into my Postman, for instance, and I say get coffee, boom, there's 2 cups of coffee right there. We're almost there. I've had 4 this morning, so we can actually say, yeah, I had 2 over here on Android, and we're getting closer. Cool. So now I have those 2 there. Rest assured, those are in the database. If I say I'm at home, now I'm at home, and then we'll see the made at home there on those different devices and the different timestamps there. So what's awesome about this is that now I can launch it on iOS or UWP and get the same experience. So I'm going to start it up here. We're going to go ahead and restart it over here. My cup of coffee. There we go. Ideally. There we go. Big. There we go. Not sure what's happening there. Let's go ahead and close out some things. Come on, computer. There we go. So now I have my, my UWP application. I can add a cup of coffee there. It's going to go, add it up. We have all the same data. I can pull to refresh over on Android. Looks like there's some, 7:44. And it's actually working correctly, even though the times are different time zones. That one's, for some reason, 2 hours different, but it's here. So I have the same exact type application that's over here. Now, what's really cool, though, is that I can come back over into Android. I'm going to go ahead and put it in airplane mode. And I have this little no connection made. So if I go ahead and say I'm at home, I add some cups of coffee here. This is a normal day, about 8 cups. And I come over and I have this little hidden refresh button. See, nothing's happening over there. I can still add a coffee. There we go. What's cool here is that what I can do is as soon as I come on, there we go, back online. There we go. I'm back online. I should be able to pull to refresh. Now at this point, it should be able to go and make the new connections and synchronize the database. That's there, ideally. Come on. Do it, do it. Do it, do it. Give it a second, do it. Do it. When in doubt, just close it out. Let's see again. So now your users have closed their application because they were offline. They're not going to use it. They're going to relaunch it. That's what happens. Let's see if it synchronizes now. Come on. There we go. Now, all that data has been synchronized across. So when I'm offline, I come back online, all the data is there, and rest assured, whenever I come back into Postman, I hit send, boom, there's all my data, all my coffee. Same thing's true here. If I go into my iOS application, I set that as the startup, and I go ahead and deploy this on my iOS simulator. This should go ahead and deploy and spin that up. So what's cool is that we'll have the same application, all sharing that backend code across iOS, Android, and Windows 10 applications. And I still believe that they support, you can go back even to Windows Store, like 8 applications as well. But here we go. This should be our iOS application that's there. There we go. This is our remote iOS simulator. So it's just talking to my MacBook Adorable over here, and it's going to spin up this simulator for us. Cool. There we go. Boop. My beautiful splash screen. And there's my coffee. There's all my coffees. I'm at home. There's my coffees. So many coffees. And it's all synchronizing all to my Azure backend synchronously in under just about 20, 30 lines of code, which is crazy. Cool. So what's nice about this approach is that it really gives you full control. You saw I was in control of the synchronization. I was control of everything. There's a lot more that's baked into it. Push notifications with Azure Notification Hubs to do notifications across all of your devices. It also does synchronization with file stores, so blob storage to do images synchronized through the same SDK that you can add on top of it. It does online-offline data synchronization there too. We have a cool sample that does all of that. It's called the shopping demo that does image sync, it does authentication, online-offline sync, all that jazz, which is really cool. So let's talk about real-time databases in the last 13 minutes that I have. Because in this scenario, I was really in control of saying the standard, I'm inserting data, I'm updating data, I'm deleting data, and I'm selectively doing it when I want to, which is really powerful. But what if I want to do it in real time? So as soon as I have the data, it's automatically, and I don't have to worry about anything at all. And this is where Realm comes in. Realm is a company. It's not a Microsoft company. It's this awesome startup out of San Francisco. They've been around for quite a few years, and they're used by tens of thousands of huge companies. And they've always, for a long time, had an offline-only database. That's what they focused on, is a crazy fast database. So Realm is a company, and they're also a database. So the Realm mobile database is for iOS and Android, and now it's also for UWP and Windows desktop applications. So if you're creating WPF applications, you can use it there. It's developed in the open. And it's spectacular, and it's for every single type of application out there. Now, what's cool about the database is that it's super fast. It's going to allow you to do offline functionality first. So if you're doing something like my Meetup Manager, you can use that too. It's thread safe, so you can update things no matter what. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's built with a reactive architecture, and you can even add 256-bit encryption with just a few lines of code. So a little bit different here than a normal SQL-type table structure, as you inherit from this Realm object, which has a bunch of different helper methods to do the synchronization for you. So if I was going to insert an object like a dog or something like that, I'd have a Realm object, which implements a bunch of other properties for me. And I say, give me my Realm instance, and then I can insert the dog. And I can do that on a background thread, the UI thread. It doesn't matter. I can do it wherever I want. If I want to get all my dogs, I say from this Realm, which you can think of a Realm as your database, because it's not SQL, it's not NoSQL, it's Realm, it's its own thing. You can say, give me all my dogs where the age is less than 2. Now, this looks like it's going to go get all the dogs first and then do the link query, but it's not doing that, actually. It's going to do it on demand. And in fact, it's not actually even really returning a list of dogs at that point. It's returning an iQueryable, which will actually do it on demand. It's really kind of cool. You can turn on encryption by just passing it a new byte array and saying this is my realm configuration, and now everything will be 256-bit encrypted on the device automatically for you. And now you would just go out and get your dogs and do all your contains or anything like that automatically. And that's just the database. There's no online or offline sync yet. And this is where the Realm object server comes in. Just like I deployed an ASP.NET backend, there's got to be a backend somewhere that can communicate with the mobile applications. So there's a Realm object server that you deploy anywhere you want. Realm is not a, you don't buy Realm. You download Realm, and then you deploy it wherever you want. And there's different tiers. There's a free tier that you can use for production apps for the Realm object. Then they have like Pro and Enterprise stuff too. But they're not hosting your data. You're hosting your data wherever you want, whether it's on-prem, whether it's in a cloud. So the Realm object server is what's going to talk to this database. And you don't have to actually change anything from what I just showed you for the querying. What's cool here is that it's actually a direct connection to the Realm object server. So statistically on the right here is what you're seeing is kind of what I just did, is I have a SQL server, I have some JSON backend, I pull it down, I put it in SQLite, I turn it into a native object, and then I pass it back up. Now the Azure Mobile Apps SDK kind of abstracted that for me into just inserts and deletes. But the thing with the Realm object server is it's a direct connection, and it's a real-time connection. So as soon as things update in the mobile app, they're immediately sent to the Realm backend automatically for you, and vice versa. What's cool is that this makes it easy to do things such as creating event processing, real-time two-way data synchronization, messaging applications, real-time collaboration, or even IoT sensor synchronization. So it can handle tons of amounts of data all in real time. So let me show you what that looks like, because we're going to have to deploy a Realm backend. Now, the Realm backend is something that you download and deploy yourself, and where you deploy it is onto a Linux machine. I'm not a Linux expert, but it's really easy to put it onto a Linux distribution. They support CentOS 6, 7, and Ubuntu 16.04. What's really, of course, is great is that in Azure, we also have Linux VMs, and we support Ubuntu 16.04. Go figure. So let's do this, and let's put it into some action. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my Mac. There we go. There we go. Perfect. So this is realm.io, and you can read all about the different SDKs, how you can build it. And you can even see sample code in Java, Objective-C, React Native, Swift, or Xamarin for all the different configurations. Here inside the Realm mobile database, you can learn more about just the database itself, kind of like I showed. And then there's great documentation to get you started with those distributions. Now, it'll give you all of the commands that you would have to SSH in for into your Linux machine. But what I want to do is take this distribution, this package, and I don't have a Linux machine. I'm not a Linux person. I don't really like Linux. It's just not my bag. I'm a Windows person and kind of a little bit of a Mac person. But what's cool is that I'll let Azure handle all of my Linux VMs for me automatically. So I'm logged into the same account. And what's great here is when I hit New, I can actually come in and just search for Realm. And we've partnered with Realm, so you can, with one click, set up your Realm backend and deploy it automatically. And what this will do is it'll set up your VM type, your username, your password credentials, everything like that, automatically with Realm. You can select your VM machine. It'll spin up your Linux VM for you. It will configure and install Realm automatically for you in just under 5 minutes. I don't have quite 5 minutes, so what I want to do is I already have it spun up here. And this has all of my normal VM connections. Here I can connect to it. It has an IP address where I can SSH into. But what I'm going to do is just go ahead and talk to the Realm object backend. So this is what the backend looks like. I'm running version 1.30. You can manage your realms, which are all the different data that are coming in, your users. So I've created a single user account. They also support Google login, Azure AD login, Twitter login, all that stuff. But it comes with the default username and password store automatically. And you can also look at all your logs and everything coming in real time. If you want to integrate, they also have a Node.js SDK, so you can integrate that into your website. So what I've done here is I have an app, and I'm inside of Visual Studio for Mac over here. I'll just make this a little bit bigger. What this is going to do is it's going to allow me to create journal entries, so I can connect to that backend automatically. So what we can see here is that I have this Realm object, a journal entry, I have a title, I have body text, I also have metadata that's coming in. Now, these are nested objects, and Realm handles that all automatically for me, so I don't have to worry about doing any parent-child relationships. I have a very simple view model here that's going to allow me to add an entry, delete an entry. And what I'm going to do here is as soon as it spins up, I'm going to connect to my Realm. And it's a very simple code to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm just hard coding for demo purposes. You'd have your user enter their username and password, obviously, and store that in secure storage. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, give me your credentials. Where's the backend? Log in asynchronously for me so I have my per user data. And I'm going to create this synchronization config to this journal entry. So you can configure these and have multiple realms for every user. And then I simply say get instance, so I can access that realm. And what you can see here is I'm saying get all entries, or insert a new entry here whenever I want to add it. And then edit an entry and delete an entry. What's cool here is that built right into my pages, so here I have a list here, is I'm just doing a data binding to my entries, to the bindable properties on my list. I also have another page here. And what I'm doing is I'm binding directly to the Realm object. And it's a live object that's going to enable me to actually modify it in real time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run an iOS and Android application. And all I have installed here is the Realm databases that are on here. Is that the correct IP that I had? It does look like it. Yep, 32. All right, so I should be able to hit go. That's not good. There we go, build. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy on iOS and Android at the same time. So it's going to spin up and start my emulators here. This is kind of a unique thing we have in VS or Mac, where you can deploy on multiple emulators and simulators at the same time. So I'm going to do is just kind of scale this down a little bit. There we go. And we have our Android emulator. There we go. I'll give it a few seconds to start up and spin up and then deploy. It is on a MacBook Adorable with a mobile processor, so you got to give it a few seconds. I do love it because it weighs like 1 pound. So, all right, now we should be able to deploy. Oh, I know what I have to do, why this is not deploying, because I have this thing open. All right, give me 1 second here. Come on. Oh, there it goes. Cool. All right. So I should have my app. I have nothing in it at this point, and it should be starting over here on Android. There we go. So it's the same application. It's as simple as Xamarin Forms app. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit add. And when I do that, it's going to be a little bit interesting, because what I do is I insert it into the database first, just because for demo purposes it's way cool. Because when I hit add, it just shows up over there immediately, which is crazy. And what I just did is I did a full round trip in real time to this Linux backend. So what's crazy here is it's real time. So as I update, what? That is crazy. Clap, please. That's kind of cool. Now, I didn't do anything. I just data bind directly to the actual data that's there. So no matter if I come in and I add more data over here and I save it over here, I can come in, I can add more back and forth. I can swipe to delete, and everything is data bound back and forth for me. It's bananas. I don't understand how it works, and I do understand how it works, but it's crazy. Like every time I do this, it just blows my mind. So for instance, if I come back over here and I go into airplane mode, what I can do is I can just simply start adding some more stuff, and I'll say like this is new, and I'll hit save. And if I come back over here into my Android emulator, I can go back into my quick journal. Now what this is going to do is it's going to actually, I'm offline, so it's going to try to make the connection actually to my backend, and it can't. And it should be displaying my data locally for some reason, but I don't think it's not. Oh, it broke because I have some bugs in it, so that's good. Rest assured that that normally totally works. So I should be able to come back in and go back online. There we go, now we're connecting. And then there's my new data that just came in from my actual iOS application. And it's all synchronized, but it's all in real time. Now, what's of course important here is that it's the use case that you're desiring. Whether you want this real-time database where it's inserting everything in real time with real connections and handling it for you, it's very magical, or if you want that complete control with something like Azure. But these are two amazing technologies that are available today, and basically it doesn't cost anything to use, which is crazy, because you can just deploy it on your own Linux machine, whether it's Azure, whether it's Linode, whether it's something else. So let me summarize here since I'm out of time. I like to say plan for global reach. I know that sometimes you're stuck on your database that's sitting under some developer's desk, but try to plan to migrate that code somewhere so you can easily deploy automatically. Cache locally first, like I did, even if you're integrating into a third-party API, and always just push data and assume success, really. We have tons of training at Xamarin University, which is our live interactive training where we talk about Azure stuff, building apps with Xamarin. I have a session later today in this room at around 13:45. Make sure you select that green card and put it in the box. That's what Henry did, and we would appreciate that. I know that it's filled with yellows, but let's fill it up with greens because I'd love to come back yet again. And with that, thanks everyone so much. I'll be hanging around the Channel 9 booth, so if you have any questions, feel free to grab me in the hallway once I close down, or come hang out with us at Channel 9. And thanks again. I'll leave this up for a few seconds.